Hey, welcome back to Recap Stories. Today we're looking at the very awesome John Carpenter cult classic, In the Mouth of Madness. Please like and subscribe if you haven't, and spoilers ahead. The film begins and we get some knockoff Metallica playing, while we watch as In the Mouth of Madness, the latest book written by Sutter Kane, is in production. We're inside a mental facility. Orderlies bring out a patient by the name of John Trent. He attacks them and is being taken off to room number 9. John starts screaming, "I am not insane," and we see his other patients start saying they aren't either. Some calming music is pumped through the speakers, which I think would drive me even crazier. The music dies as the lights start to flicker. We see a hand knock on the window to John's room. His room darkens as a figure is standing behind him. A Dr. Wren arrives wanting to speak to John. He wants to know what the hell's going on. We find John in the midst of drawing crosses all over his room and himself. The men begin to talk and we find out John was a freelance insurance investigator, exposing fraudulent claims and the like. He had been hired by a firm to find the author Sutter Kane, who had gone missing. We go back a bit sometime and John is exposing a man for a fraudulent fire insurance claim. John is at lunch with the man who hired him and we see a man come out of a store holding an axe. He smashes through the window, nearly hitting the men. He bends down asking John if he reads Sutter Kane. His eyes crazed with two pupils. He tries to swing again but is brought down by the police. John is watching a news report about the outbreaks and violence over Sutter Kane's newest book, which he believes to be nonsense. The following day he meets with Jackson Harglow, the publisher of Sutter Kane's books. He tells John Sutter Kane went missing 2 months ago, and his manager was the man that attacked him with the axe. John talks with one of the editors, Linda Stiles, and he thinks the whole thing was a publicity stunt. She insists it isn't and that Kane's books have effects on some of his less than stable readers. Stiles tells him to try reading Kane's stuff, maybe he'll get it then. John walks by an alley on his way home finding a cop beating a man with his club. He's on the phone with his boss saying the whole thing is a scam. John is at a store picking up some of Kane's books and a man tells him he can see you. John just looks at him and says, yeah, tell him I said hi. He gets a call from his employer telling him he's been reading the books and they're better written than he thought and they kind of get to you. John is back in that alley and the cop is beating that man still. People with axes appear from behind. We see the cop's face and it's all messed up. The manager is amongst the crowd and tells John he sees you as they proceed to murder him with their axes. John wakes from his nightmare and throws the book. He notices something though with the covers. He starts cutting and tearing at the books. The pieces form a map and John believes this is where Sutter Kane is. Somewhere in New Hampshire, but not on any modern day maps. John still believes the whole thing to be nonsense, but says he'll go find this place. Harglow says they have nothing to hide and sends Stiles along with him to prove it. They're driving around and appear to be lost. It's nighttime and Stiles takes over as the driver. She drives by a kid on his bike, which is strange as they're out in the middle of nowhere. She screams and slams on the brakes as she hits that kid on the bike, now seemingly very old. She runs over to him and he says, "I can't get out. He won't let me." We then see him behind her as he gives a sinister smile and rides off. Stiles is driving again and the road just disappears. She looks out the window and sees they're driving over storming clouds. A bunch of bright flashes and it's suddenly daytime and they're in Hobbs End. Stiles has had enough and tells John he's driving now. It's like a ghost town. Stiles sees a dog run by with school children following. Something isn't quite right. They arrive at the Pickman Hotel and if you know, you know. John says he thought she's never been here before. She says she hasn't, but she read about it, and so has John. This is all from Kane's books. We meet Mrs. Pickman, the little old lady that runs the inn. She tells them they don't get many visitors these days. Stiles turns and sees a painting turn and look at her. John tells her they're not living in a Sutter Kane book, but she says everything is in this book. Mrs. Pickman murders her husband in the book. Stiles says, what if Kane's work isn't fiction? John says if that's true, then out this window would be a church. Stiles points out that he didn't pay enough attention and it's from the east view. They're walking up to the church and John reads from one of the books. The church once housed creatures that contaminated time itself. Stiles sees the dog again being chased by the children. The doors to the church are locked but a bunch of vehicles drive up with Stiles saying they have to leave. A man shouts telling Kane to give them back. The doors open with Sutter Kane standing there. A bunch of Dobermans come around the corner and attack the men. John and Stiles get in their car and a little girl looks at them and says, "I see." John is pissed and thinks this whole thing is fake in order to sell more books. Stiles says he's wrong, well half wrong. They were to send Kane away, only he never showed. Harglow sent Stiles and John because they weren't supposed to actually find anything, but they did. She's adamant none of this is staged and it's all real. It's all from the new book only her and the agent have read. It's about the end of the world. An old evil returns and it all starts here. It begins with the children, people turning into things. John says he's leaving without her, except we see her with the keys. He notices the painting is distorted and more disturbing than before. He speaks with Mrs. Pickman and something is definitely going on. Stiles runs past him and he chases after her. She leaves without him. Mrs. Pickman says hush, and we see her husband handcuffed to her ankle. John is in a bar and one of the men from earlier comes in. He tells John to leave while he can. John thinks they're all actors. The man tells him to get out before it gets you. Stiles arrives at the church. She turns around and the children are there. The dog, now missing one leg, whimpers off. The children are all disfigured and corrupted. Stiles enters the church and comes to an ominous-looking door. She opens it, finding Sutter Kane typing away, writing his story. Kane welcomes her and says it's funny. For years I thought I was making this up, but they were telling me what to write. We see a large door pulsating from within. John is back at the hotel trying to see if Stiles returned. She jumps on his back screaming, "I'm losing me. I read the book, John. I'm losing me." John heads downstairs to use the phone, but it doesn't work. He notices the painting now features these weird tentacled beings. He hears screaming and noises coming from the basement. In the basement stands monstrous Mrs. Pickman, hacking away at her husband with an axe. John rushes upstairs to find Stiles. We see her behind a door, but she's not alone. John takes off running. There's another creature where the garden should be. John gets in his car and drives off. He runs into the townsfolk, now all changed and driven completely mad. John still thinks it's all an act though. He finds Stiles, knocking her out and throwing her in the car. John drives off just as the townfolk approach the car. He stops and finds the kid on the bike again at a payphone. Stiles comes out from behind the car, spider walking with her head completely turned around. John leaves without her but is brought back to the town. He still thinks it's all fake, but the town just won't let him leave. John drives through the crowd but swerves trying to avoid hitting Stiles. He wakes inside a church confessional booth. Kane is on the other side telling John more people believe in his work than they do the Bible now. John is still trying to rationalize what's going on. He's transported to Kane's writing room, and Kane hands John his new finished book. The town didn't exist before Kane wrote about it, and neither did John. Kane's manager tried to kill John to prevent him from bringing back the manuscript, and thus the end of the world. Kane tells him to read the book and see what he has in store for him. He tells John to go now, as he rips a tear in space, time, and dimensions. John stares into the abyss as Stiles reads from the book. John runs as these unnameable, unspeakable horrors chase after him. He awakes back in his reality. A young Hayden Christensen asks if he needs help. He asks if the kid has ever heard of Hobbs End, but he just shakes his head no. He's at a hotel and the man working the front desk tells him he has a package, which is weird because no one knows he's there. He opens it, revealing the manuscript for the book. John grabs the man, asking who sent it, but he doesn't know. He burns the manuscript, trying to destroy it. John is riding a bus back and finds Kane sitting next to him. Luckily, it was just a nightmare. John is slowly losing his grip on reality, though. He's back with Mr. Harglow telling him what he saw and what happened. Harglow, however, thinks it's all just a story. He says he sent John alone and never heard of a woman named Stiles. John, visibly confused, says, "Oh, well, she must have been written out of the book." Harglow thinks the books have affected him. John says this is why he had to destroy the last manuscript. Harglow tells him now he knows that isn't true because John delivered the manuscript months ago to him personally. The book was published and has been in stores for 7 weeks. He tells John the movie comes out next month and John is terrified. There's an epidemic of violence breaking out all over the city because of the book. John asks the man if he liked the book. He says he loves it, and John says, well, this shouldn't come as a surprise, as he murders him with an axe. Back in the mental facility, and the madness is spreading. It gets stronger with every new reader. Dr. Wren goes to leave, and John tells him it's safer in here now. The power goes out, and we hear screams and see shadowy figures coming from outside. His door opens, and we see blood and destruction. People are changing and all becoming infected with the madness. John enters a movie theater to watch the movie, and he sees himself on the screen. He starts laughing and crying as the madness takes over and the film comes to an end. I hope you enjoyed today's video. In the Mouth of Madness is one of my favorite 90s horror films and a really underrated John Carpenter movie if you ask me. If you'd like more videos, please like and subscribe as that really helps the channel out. Thank you all for the support and take care everyone.